Khe Sanh 1968, trapped for 77 days in Vietnam's deadliest siege. For 77 days, 6,000 U.S. Marines fought to survive in one of the most brutal sieges of the Vietnam War. They were surrounded by an enemy that outnumbered them more than 3-1. Every road leading out had been cut. Artillery shells fell day and night. Food, water, and ammunition could only arrive by aircraft flying through walls of anti-aircraft fire. Many compared Khe Sanh to another famous siege, Dien Bien Phu, where French forces had been crushed by Vietnamese troops just 14 years earlier. Around the world, military analysts believed history was about to repeat itself. But Khe Sanh would become something different. This is the story of fear, endurance, and survival inside one of the most heavily bombarded battlefields in modern military history. Before we begin, take a moment to subscribe, and let us know in the comments, which battle from military history should we cover next? In early 1968, the Vietnam War had already dragged on for years. American forces controlled major cities and military bases, but the countryside remained fiercely contested. Hidden jungle trails stretching through neighboring Laos allowed North Vietnamese soldiers to move weapons and reinforcements south almost unnoticed. Near that vital network of supply routes sat a lonely combat base called Khe Sanh. It rested on a plateau in northwestern South Vietnam, less than 10 miles from the Laotian border. Dense jungle covered the surrounding mountains, creating countless hiding places for enemy troops. To American commanders, the base served several purposes. It monitored enemy movement along the Ho Chi Minh Trail, blocked possible invasions across the border, and projected American power into one of the most remote regions of the country. But those same mountains also made Khe Sanh dangerously isolated. Only one major road connected the base to the outside world, Route 9. Only one major road connected the base to the outside world, Route 9. If that road were cut, the Marines would have only one remaining lifeline, the sky. Few realized how soon that nightmare would become reality. Throughout late 1967, intelligence reports began painting an alarming picture. Reconnaissance patrols encountered increasingly organized North Vietnamese forces. Enemy activity intensified around the surrounding hills. Small clashes became more frequent. Some officers believed something much larger was unfolding. Meanwhile, General William Westmoreland believed Khe Sanh might draw the North Vietnamese Army into a major conventional battle. American firepower had always been overwhelming in open combat. If the enemy concentrated large formations around the base, they could potentially suffer devastating losses from artillery and airstrikes. Whether intentionally or not, Khe Sanh increasingly became the center of attention. The North Vietnamese commander, General Vo Nguyen Giap, had other plans. Rather than launching immediate assaults, his forces quietly surrounded the base. Thousands of soldiers disappeared into caves, trenches, and fortified positions hidden within the mountains. Heavy artillery pieces were dragged through dense jungle by hand. Mortars were carefully camouflaged. Anti-aircraft guns overlooked likely flight paths. Supply tunnels stretched beneath the trees. The trap was slowly closing. Everything changed before dawn on January 21, 1968. Without warning, hundreds of artillery shells screamed toward the base. The bombardment shook the earth. Explosions ripped through bunkers. Communication lines were severed. One shell struck the main ammunition depot. Seconds later, an enormous explosion erupted. Thousands of artillery rounds, mortar shells, and rockets detonated simultaneously. Flames towered hundreds of feet into the air. Shrapnel rained across the base. Fuel stores ignited. The blast destroyed much of the Marines' precious supplies in only a few moments. The siege had officially begun. Within hours, Route 9 became unusable. Enemy troops occupied the surrounding high ground. Khe Sanh was effectively surrounded. Nearly 6,000 Marines suddenly found themselves trapped. Life inside the combat base quickly transformed into a battle simply to stay alive. The surrounding hills overlooked nearly every position. Any movement could attract sniper fire or artillery. Marines learned to move only when absolutely necessary. Most of their time was spent underground. Bunkers became bedrooms. command centers, medical stations, dining rooms. Entire lives shrank into cramped spaces carved beneath layers of sandbags, timber, and thick red clay. The soil itself became unforgettable. Unlike ordinary dirt, Khe Sanh's volcanic earth stained everything deep reddish-brown. It covered boots, weapons, food, blankets, faces. Even after washing, the dust seemed impossible to remove. When rain arrived, the dirt transformed into thick mud that swallowed boots and flooded trenches. When the sun returned, it hardened into concrete. Neither condition offered comfort. The psychological pressure proved even worse. No one knew when the next shell would arrive. Sometimes there would be silence for hours. Then suddenly dozens of explosions erupted across the base. Other times artillery continued through the night, preventing anyone from sleeping. The constant uncertainty slowly wore people down. Many Marines later described developing an instinctive reaction to incoming shells. They learned to distinguish different sounds. Some rounds exploded immediately. Others buried themselves before detonating. Experienced Marines could often estimate where a shell might land simply by listening. Those instincts saved lives. But they also revealed how completely the siege had consumed daily existence. Medical personnel faced impossible conditions. Doctors and corpsmen operated inside dim underground bunkers. Supplies were limited. Electricity was unreliable. Patients often arrived covered in mud, smoke, and blood. Many surgeries occurred while artillery continued exploding overhead. Every successful operation became another small victory against circumstances that seemed almost hopeless. Outside the aid stations, Marines worked continuously repairing damaged defenses. Every night enemy shells destroyed sections of trench. Every morning those trenches had to be rebuilt before the next bombardment began. Sleep became rare. Exhaustion became normal. Yet morale somehow endured. Humor remained one of the few weapons available. Letters from home circulated through bunkers. Coffee became precious. Small conversations distracted men from the explosions outside. These ordinary moments became extraordinary acts of resilience. The greatest challenge remained supplies. An isolated force of thousands required enormous quantities of food, ammunition, fuel, water, and medical equipment every day. Normally trucks delivered these supplies along Route 9. Now the road belonged to the enemy. Everything depended on aircraft. Flying into Khe Sanh became one of the most dangerous missions of the Vietnam War. Transport planes approached low through clouds and fog. Enemy anti-aircraft guns opened fire from concealed mountain positions. Pilots flew directly into exploding shells. Landing even for a few minutes risked destruction. Some aircraft barely stopped before unloading cargo and immediately taking off again. Others avoided landing entirely. Instead, they released heavy pallets using specialized extraction systems while racing down the runway. The supplies slid onto the airfield as the aircraft climbed away under enemy fire. Every successful delivery represented courage measured in seconds. Helicopter crews faced equally terrifying missions. Small outposts occupied nearby hills overlooking the main base. Those positions depended entirely on helicopters. Pilots threaded through valleys surrounded by enemy machine guns. Landing zones were tiny. Sometimes helicopters remained on the ground for less than 20 seconds before lifting off again. Water. Medical evacuations. Ammunition. Every flight could determine whether an outpost survived another day. Some crews returned with bullet holes covering their aircraft. Others never returned at all. As February continued, American commanders noticed disturbing changes. Reconnaissance aircraft detected fresh trenches creeping steadily toward Marine positions. The North Vietnamese appeared to be preparing for a large-scale assault. If thousands of infantry attacked simultaneously, the defenders might be overwhelmed. The United States responded with overwhelming air power. Operation Niagara began. It became one of the most concentrated aerial bombing campaigns ever conducted in support of ground troops. Fighter jets struck enemy positions throughout the day. Marine aircraft attacked bunkers hidden beneath jungle canopies. Navy planes arrived from aircraft carriers offshore. Then came the B-52 bombers. Flying at extremely high altitude, each bomber carried enormous bomb loads capable of devastating wide areas. When several aircraft attacked together, the earth itself seemed to move. Entire hillsides disappeared beneath explosions. Trees snapped like matchsticks. Shockwaves rolled across the valleys. Marines inside reinforced bunkers felt the ground lift beneath them. Many later said the bombers sounded less like explosions and more like earthquakes. The bombing never completely stopped. Wave after wave continued around the clock. It became one of history's greatest demonstrations of concentrated air power. Despite these devastating strikes, the North Vietnamese remained determined. Rather than exposing themselves in open battle, many sheltered inside elaborate bunker systems dug into mountainsides. They emerged after bombardments ended. They repaired damaged positions. They continued firing artillery. The siege became a contest of endurance. Who would break first? The defenders inside the base? Or the attackers waiting beyond the hills? Meanwhile, events elsewhere in Vietnam changed everything. At the end of January 1968, Communist forces launched a massive Tet Offensive across South Vietnam. Cities throughout the country suddenly came under attack. Military attention shifted dramatically. Some historians still debate whether Khe Sanh had been intended as the main objective or partly as a way to draw American resources away from the coming nationwide offensive. Regardless, the siege continued. The Marines still faced daily bombardment. The danger remained very real. Finally, after weeks of fighting, American and South Vietnamese forces pushed westward along Route 9. Their objective was simple: reach Khe Sanh. Break the siege. The advance encountered mines, ambushes, and stubborn resistance. Progress remained painfully slow. Eventually, in early April 1968, relief forces linked up with the exhausted defenders. After 77 relentless days, the siege had officially ended. The Marines had held. The base had not fallen. Around the world, many observers who expected another Dien Bien Phu were surprised. Khe Sanh remained under American control. Yet the story did not end there. Only a few months later, military strategies shifted. Senior commanders concluded the isolated base no longer justified its enormous logistical cost. American forces dismantled bunkers, destroyed equipment they could not remove, evacuated personnel. Then they abandoned Khe Sanh. For many veterans, the decision felt deeply bittersweet. Friends had died defending ground that would soon be left behind. It raised difficult questions that still surround the Vietnam War today. Was the siege a strategic victory? A costly stalemate? Or simply another chapter in a conflict where success often proved impossible to define? More than half a century later, the scarred hills around Khe Sanh have largely returned to green. Grass covers old trenches. Trees stand where bomb craters once stretched across the landscape. Yet beneath that peaceful scenery lies the memory of 77 days that tested human endurance to its limits. For the Marines who survived, Khe Sanh was more than a military operation. It was weeks spent underground listening for the next incoming shell. It was friendships forged beneath constant danger. It was courage measured not by dramatic charges across battlefields, but by waking each morning and continuing to do the job despite overwhelming odds. The siege of Khe Sanh remains one of the defining battles of the Vietnam War, not because it produced a decisive victory, but because it revealed the extraordinary resilience of the people caught inside it. If you enjoyed this documentary, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next story from history.